thank you all for coming. I'll be John tonight, since John can't be here. We're excited to have the four artists and foundations here to talk about the show. Ben Boothby, Celeste Henriquez, Geoff Masland, and Dean McCrillis. As always, we are live streaming the talks on our Facebook page. If you can't make it to the gallery, you can always watch the live stream. Facebook keeps a copy of the video on our page, and we also post the video to our YouTube page, so you can go back to the YouTube page and watch any of our previous videos. So a little bit about each of the artists. Ben Boothby has a BA in painting from Wesleyan University. Is that University? No, okay, right. And an MFA in painting from the Academy of Art, University of San Francisco, where he also was an instructor for several years. You may have seen his work here before in either our Next Gen show or the Running with Scissors 20th anniversary show. He's shown throughout Maine and the East Coast, including Washington, D.C., New York City, and Boston. And Celeste Henriquez. Celeste received her BFA in illustration from Philadelphia College of Art and has illustrated nationally for book publishers, editorial, and advertisers. You may have seen her work here before at her work at our sister gallery, Green Hut, in our biennials and other galleries throughout the state, as well as the Portland Museum of Art. Geoff Masland has a BA from Colorado College. Like Ben, he was also in our Next Gen show, and he was also in last year's biennial at the Center for Maine Contemporary Art. Geoff has been awarded grants by the Maine Arts Commission and the Union of Maine Visual Artists, and has been featured in an issue of the New American Painting. Dean McCrillis has a BFA from USM. His work has been shown here as well as Green Hut, including a solo side gallery show last year. He's shown throughout the state and has recently completed a residency at Hune Oaks. Dean is our current artist in residence at Cove Street, and we'll have a solo show next year here. So I'm going to pass this along, but first I think I'd love to have each of the artists to talk about how they feel their work fits into the theme of the show. But first I want to throw to Dean, and as this show is Dean's brainchild, let's start by asking why these four artists and why the title Foundations.
Hey everybody. This show came about from, I guess the bulk of my work has always been about where I grew up, my family life, and after getting to know a few of these artists, Geoff and Ben, through various shows, and talking to them about how their very radically different looking work, what it was about, we all kind of struck this same sort of chord, where it was we were dealing with memory, dealing with place, dealing with how we process those different ideas, and we were talking about this earlier today too, which is really interesting. And I wanted to sort of put together a show that was visually different, that looked, that the work fit together. There was a thread through everything, but each artist had a distinct voice in how they approached that particular subject matter. Celeste, I knew Celeste just from being in the art community in Portland, and I was always so interested in how she approached her work. I remember one of the first pieces I saw of hers was in a show at Green Hut, and it was I think it was the house that you said you lived in on your block, and it was this beautiful sort of like fragmented house, and all, like, you could see the inside of the house and the outside of the house, and it was just so loaded with information and memory that I thought of her instantly for the show as well. So that's how it started, and I'll throw it to Ben to see what he has.
Thank you. I think it's interesting because for me, this show made so much sense for my work. Like it almost felt like the description was written for the why I've been making these paintings. But then thinking about it in terms of the foundations of what has created this direction, this body of work, and we were talking about like that fragmentation of memory and the paintings, for me, being a visualization of what memories look like in our heads. But the foundations of that are my life experience and the places that I've chosen to time travel back to again and again. And there's some repetition in my paintings in the show because I find when I keep going back to the same memory, it may be a little bit different, or like as you were saying before, like as you get older, that same memory might have shifted and changed. And so in context with everyone else, I feel like it is a little bit different to be thinking about these paintings in terms of where they actually come from, the autobiographical aspect of these that I've always kind of avoided a little bit, because it's like, well, I'm trying to make these paintings for everyone, and my family who have experienced those memories might look at them and say like, oh, that's the attic from that house on that street. But it's very different from what everyone else sees. Yeah, does that?
Well, when Dean came to my studio and he proposed this idea, he mentioned home, and that just really clicked for me. I don't necessarily think I'm always painting about home, but for sure I'm using memory and family and kind of emotion and environments to express, I guess, a passionate pull I have for home. So it just clicked and seemed like a great idea. When I work, I'm usually writing a lot about what I've experienced, what I'm feeling, and then images start to attach to those, and then they're just filed away, or I have ideas that turn into small like thumbnail drawings, or I might even make a little book out of it. I usually have a lot of words that I'll write on my studio wall just to kind of keep the momentum going. And then perhaps I'm in a certain mood, and so then things shift, or I'm in a certain place in my painting style, and so maybe what I envisioned it turning into will be different. But I'm clearly, the through line is, I think, memory. And I think maybe it can even go like to personal memories of hard times, or personal memories of being a parent, or having enough distance now where things seem humorous, and how do I play with that? So I don't know, it kind of expands and contracts. It moves as I grow as a painter.
For me, it's always boiling down to absence and presence. Those are the two sort of basic thesis tension. It really propels me, and I think growing up in New England, taciturn Yankee family, I was so curious, and I had so many questions I never asked. And when I did ask them, I don't really feel like I got much of the answer I was looking for, or the story behind what drove my question. And as I've gotten older, I've felt a lot of that curiosity just kind of get stuck and come out in different ways and different emotions, and only through the process of sitting and being still and spending as much time as I need to working through whatever I'm thinking about, have I been able to find the answers and find the the pieces that I covet. You know, there's certain parts of my heritage and parts of different relatives that I'm so compelled to learn about, and in many ways, it all begins with my family of origin. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten a lot better at asking these questions, and I've turned over some of the answers, but at the same time, it's broadened, and home for me is sort of gone back into my history with ancestors I've never met, through learning about my genealogy and reading about folks I'm related to, and then also thinking about the future and the longevity of artwork. And when I'm at my best, I feel like I'm in the space with people from the past and the future, and we're all having a conversation.
That's very interesting stuff, guys.
You haven't talked about you.
Yeah. Well, we can skip that part. But I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about the conversation that we were having, or kick it off with part of the conversation that we're having, where, and I think a lot of artists and people that are creative can sort of understand this part of it. But we were talking about how collection is a big part of what we do. And it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. So in my particular case, I know I definitely have a collector's bug, you know, and whether it's weird oddities, like strange, you know, things like, you know, bones that I've found out in the woods, and, you know, a set of deer antlers that I stumbled upon in my grandmother's, you know, property, you know, things like that. But it's also a collection of memories too, and how you process those things, and how it comes out in your work. So, you know, your origins, your things that make you a person, that make you an individual, are all very personal, and you sort of collect these things over time, or sometimes it's even things that you're told from your own, you know, history and your own family. Like, this is who you are. This is where you come from. And as artists, you're sort of constantly processing that. I know that's how I feel, and trying to put forth something that makes sense to you, or that makes those things that you've been told, or those things that you believe in yourself, that it comes out in some way. And from a physical aspect too, I mean, it's really lovely to be on the other side of it too, and be able to have visited all of you in your spaces where you're creative. And, you know, Geoff, for instance, his studio, he has these lovely containers of ripped paper, just like dozens and dozens and dozens of books that have, you know, been ripped into pieces or organized by color, and he's using them as the way, you know, a painter would organize a palette. And, you know, everyone has such a beautiful, unique space, and I was just so fascinated by how I was able to sort of peek into your organization and your collection of the way that you make creative work. So, if it's possible, I'd like to maybe have you guys talk a little bit about your process and how you organize yourself when you're getting ready to make your work, if that's all right.
Sure. So collecting, that's like, for me, instead of objects, it's a lifetime of moments that I've written really sharply, like in stone in my mind, and then a group of those same moments from the same place over time that are all somewhat clear but contradict each other because they're from different ages, different, you know, literal height changes to different times of year and different emotional associations. But so for me in my work, these paintings are from places, mostly from my childhood, where there are those layered contexts and where there's kind of a richness to it that I'll be able to go in and pull a lot of different things and then try to get them all to exist in the same image in the same painting. So I work entirely from memory. The paintings are built up from a perspective rendering that I do invent the space again, like in order to make it real, to make it have that structure that'll be literally aerial perspective wise correct. So if like the window is supposed to meet another window farther down the block, that it does that, and then it's just for some reason important to me to have that structure. And then the paint is kind of a looser, more playful exploration, and color especially is the way that I express the emotional qualities to that place and my memories of that place. But we are collections of, like our sense ourselves, our narrative is a collection of memories that we've decided for one way or the other define who we are or remind us of who we were or whatever it is. Like I think I started making these paintings because I was trying to get to that sense of how constructed our perception of self is. And then it turned out I was working with memories of architecture anyway, so it made sense that they were layered in that way too.
I think for me, I began as an illustrator, and I was trained as an illustrator. So I was working for clients who had specific ideas. So I was drawing a lot and painting a lot, and I was very realistic, and I was good at it, and I really enjoyed due dates. I love assignments. But at a certain point, I started feeling like I couldn't make art unless someone told me what to do. And I completely thought of myself as an artist, so I didn't intentionally stop being an illustrator. It just happened naturally with having children. But when I went back to art, I looked at it a little way differently, and I almost couldn't get my mind around the possibilities, let's say. So it's just been a journey for me on how I am as a painter. I don't think I'm going to ever land in a certain spot. I think it's really great when artists can grow and change and all that. But clearly I began because I needed to express a lot of emotion about I have a daughter with a disability. She's autistic, and she's 22 now, but she was a handful. And so it was a lot of, I wasn't able to draw or paint or be an illustrator anymore. So I channeled all that into quick drawings, quick photographs, or more like finding beautiful imagery in photography. Mostly of my family, my daughter, and then a lot of writing. Not so much journaling, but like writing lists of like all the things that happen within a certain amount of time, because I was starting to see them almost like a play, almost like, oh, this is going to be great material later. I'm still pretty like wrapped up in this, but I know it's going to unravel and become interesting. It was my way of kind of still getting my creative flow out. So then when I started painting, all those things just started to present themselves. Like, obviously, Celeste, you were going to paint about your daughter. You were going to paint about the different dynamics of family life. But it all came out very abstract. And that was, I think, great, because I needed to get away from the structure and just experience what paint does, what shape does. And I think I generally have a really kind of strong need to create wonderful compositions, or I feel like they're wonderful. So it just has evolved. So like the work in this show, it is about home. It's about a small painting, it's almost like a sketch out front called What Abigail Does. It's a specific experience of a situation with Abigail where it just stuck with me. So I felt I needed to create something. And it was, what I did was I created it in a stage format. Because so much time has gone by now that I can look at it more objectively. And so I'm going to place this little story in a stage. And so I have curtains. And then I have these little props. This is all me in my mind. You know, I don't know what everyone else sees when they look at it. You know, there's going to be a bus, and there's going to be clothes falling out of the bus, and there's going to be a naked leg, and there's going to be a phone call. And so I started placing these things in this one little drawing. And so, yes, it's about my daughter disrobing in the bus coming home from school. And I would get a call from the school district saying, get a robe. And I would say, okay. So I would get a robe, and I would meet her in front of her bus, and I'd wrap her up and bring her into the house. And it happened several times, so it's in my memory. So for me, it's like I have like a series I could do of just that. And it's not like I'm feeling uncomfortable about it now, or sure, right there in the moment, it's like, oh my gosh. But I find beauty in it. I find story, I find almost like it could be a play, it could be a short story, even a novel. So right now I'm painting, so occasionally the work comes out this way. So I use a lot of words. I found a sketchbook that I thought I lost for a while, and it literally has dates and times of like specific things that happen. And it's just like one or two words and another 2 words and another 2 words describing an event. And now I can look back on it and I have less of the like, and more of the like, whoa, this has a lot of material here that I can work with. So that's, in a nutshell, what I do sometimes.
I can relate to that. I think about my 2 kids, and there's this paradox in my life where I really began making a lot more art when I had my first child, even though I had so little time. And so a lot of it came out at night, sleep deprived, but it was also a state that allowed me to get into that flow state and to tell stories that I can relate to through Celeste's experiences. And when it comes to collections, kids love to collect things. I think we go through phases of collecting things, and there's a piece in this room that I'll speak to because it's sort of literally about collections. But there's a typesetter's box in the back corner that belonged to my grandmother. And growing up, it was at the top of a sort of a half staircase, a landing, in a prominent place in this cottage. You could see it from most of the living room and dining room, and it was filled with these trinkets that she bought while traveling in the late 70s and early 80s. And it was always out of my reach, and it just fascinated me. It was full of these little, it was like this talisman of the world, little lanterns and lighthouses and shoes, and almost like Monopoly pieces if you think about a Monopoly board. And then she kept a journal, and the only thing in this whole journal, and I still have it, it's all on 1.5 pages, and it's like a 100-page journal, but in this tiny handwriting, she wrote where each thing came from and the date, and it's all just like a page and a half, and I feel so sad that she didn't loosen up and go and restrained. And when she passed and we were going through all of her belongings, nobody wanted this box. I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, it's the box of stuff. Like,
spent time with it, looking at it, it just got sort of sadder and sadder and sadder, like dusty and all dead bugs in there and stuff, and nobody cared except for me. And then I found great liberation in taking all the things out. I could finally touch them. I could finally move them around. I could toss them up in the air. I could throw them across the room. And my kids played with them. And then I slowly, over the years, just kind of had that sitting around my studio. And over time, just created my own, I think I call it impressions collection. So it's just become sort of a piece in my studio that I could turn to at different times. But it's literally about collecting and collections. And as Dean mentioned, I have this fetish with paper. I love collaging. I come across paper, I have a relationship with some librarians and used bookstore owners, and they keep damaged books in the back for artists like me and others who stop by and take the books that are otherwise bound for the dump. And I know exactly what I'm looking for. I've gotten good enough and quick enough that I know the colors and the content I'm looking for, and it's just part of my practice. And a lot of other lives and other people's collections and memories have come into it, and it's allowed me, going back to that sadness of my grandmother's restraint, and it sort of speaks a lot to who she was as a person, my relationship with her, and thinking about my own children, and being a conduit between generations. I don't want to be restrained like that. I want to be free. I want to express myself. I want to tell the stories of where I've been. I want my kids to as well. And so just taking all those things out and letting my kids play with them. And there's nothing in our house that is off limits, even if it's breakable and it's just, I think a lot about collecting and what our collections say to those who come after us.
Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about sort of my relationship to that in my work as well. So my grandmother and grandfather were antique dealers for many years, and we had this big barn on the property where I grew up that was a collection of things that they had found or bought over the years. And it was sort of a like itinerary for me. It was like, these are important things, like these are beautiful things that need to be like on display, and people should be. And a lot of that was artwork, but it was also like artifacts as well. It was like old hunting knives and old fishing flies and a set of dishes from somebody's grandmother, over the years, and they were all deemed very important, and I was so fascinated by that as a kid. And through my own work, I guess I've always sort of thought of, like, what does it mean to sort of like hold on to, something that's important? What does it mean to, sieve through all of these different ideas and thoughts, and what are the key elements that stay behind that mean something? So all of the paintings that I made are, I think of them almost as like a scene in a movie, like a shot, in a cinematography sort of mindset where I'm placing these things in an image that evoke something else, that it's bigger than just the image. It's the way you feel, or it's a color that makes you feel a certain way. So that's where my sort of introduction into what it means to collect things, what it means to make something interesting, or that needs to be looked at or touched, or whatever it is that you have to do to make it stick in your head. I was always really fascinated by that.
So once you make the artwork, it's on the wall, and people are interacting with it without the whole backstory. Can you each speak to how you think about that, and whether how the work stands on its own, apart from knowing what we've just learned on these different things? So.
I guess for me, I'm trying to, make an image that maybe, has some relationship to somebody else. If you've grown up in New England or grown up in Maine, that you can at least understand the context of it without having to know the story. And I like to use sort of really vivid, like bright, sort of out of the normalcy, colors that sort of evoke something else within it. So they kind of make me a little uncomfortable in a lot of ways because I don't know what to do with them. They're maybe a little too intense, or they don't quite make sense. Like, you wouldn't look at an eclipse on an island and it wouldn't be this hot blue that glows in your face, but the feeling of being in that situation and being able to see something like that, like it just sort of, it's burned into my head and it'll always be there. So the images themselves, I want them to be relatable. I want them to be interesting from a composition standpoint, but I also want them to be really loose, and I want them to be, I want there to be interesting marks in there. I want you to sort of look through the image and, think about layering and think about, opacities and transparencies in the paint, and why this color does that on that for that particular reason. Or at least that's what I geek out about, I guess. That's all I got.
I think that for me, I think I kind of said this before, but I'm trying to create paintings that are open-ended and subjective, and that someone looking at them, the space is complicated enough, or there's contradictions in how things overlap or don't, that it engages with curiosity, and then from a curious place, your mind is accessing its own memories in order to make sense of the space. When I was doing some research on memory and neuroanatomy, there's this huge part of our brains we use for spatial memory, and it's how we can go upstairs in the dark in our house and we know when the last step is. It's how we know where our water bottle is that we put on the floor, that we go to reach for it without thinking that we have to look for it because we know where it is. So there's this huge part of our lizard brain that we're using all the time in order to remember spatial things. And I think over time, spaces that we spend a lot of time in, we're still remembering spatial things. And so I think in my work, when there's a set of stairs, someone isn't just seeing stairs, they're also kind of remembering a set of stairs from their childhood. And so to me, it's like my experience of that place, sure, it's in there, and I'm trying to communicate visually. I'm not trying to give you the same experience I had. I'm trying to present an image that is then read by every viewer totally differently. And that's what I think that's the reason why I paint, is because we can all have our own experience of this object.
I can have an emotion or a memory, but then it just hovers, and then I become a person that loves to draw and loves to create a space that builds a mood or an atmosphere. And it also depends, I suppose, on where I'm at the moment. I might get into something very detailed because I just think it needs to be that way. But I just love making marks and drawing and looking at something or having something just in my mind and trying to express it. And if I can get the expression to stay fresh without covering it up, being brave, and giving it time to grow slowly, then I feel as though I've created a moment or a mood. And then my story really isn't that important anymore. I'm just trying to make something either beautiful or have something surprise happen for me, like, oh wow, look at that. And then I go in that direction, or I think I have enough drawing skill and enough sense of like balance to finish a painting to make it look nice. But for me, it's the journey to it. It's an experience. It's all for me, honestly. It's what I need to do. So I'm trying to, and I want to do it a lot. So I'm trying to give myself as many experiences to be courageous. It's funny. It feels courageous sometimes to make marks, leave them, and feel as though they are what they are for a reason, and then trust that people will get a sense, or they'll get a mood, or something will come to them about an experience they've had that they connect to. I don't think there's a formula. It's just a need for me to build on a surface, or just to express an idea, or a thought.
Putting words to it is hard, I think. A lot of what we do defies words, defies spoken communication. And before this talk, the four of us were standing in the middle of the other room, and there's a certain presence that I feel with these three, where you don't really even have to find the words or talk. There's just an understanding. I think going back to the question of our own stories that bring us up to these pieces, and those who interact with them, and maybe buy them, take them home, take photos of them to look at later. That's a really eerie part of it that I haven't really understood or tried to. Often we don't know where these go. We don't know who takes them home. We may never see them again, and I think that's part of the excitement, the tension, the fear. It's hard enough to put it up for the world to see, but to think about someone taking it home, it's terrifying. I don't know. But at the same time, it's part of the process, and I think the pattern that I've heard from mentors is don't be precious. Get it out into the world and let it go. Let other people experience it. But I'm always curious how others interact with it and engage with it. But like Celeste said, it's for me. I mean, this is part of my life that I take very seriously and very personally, and I find hard to put words to. But just if I could take a moment transitioning to the work of these other artists, I think my relationship with Dean's work is pretty intense. I think the first pieces of his that I admired were ideas that I've had and filed away for later. But upon seeing them, I realized I couldn't do it as well as he's done. And I think for me, there's a piece right around the corner here. There was a piece in the Next Gen show, and he's caught the interaction with wildlife and animals at night, almost like lit up with car lights. And that's a relationship that I've had with the natural world that I've always been really curious about. And it's just this moment, and it's gone, and you can't capture that with a picture. And I'm really drawn to his work. And then Ben's work reminds me of being a kid. I'm sure some of you can relate to this. Flipping upside down, often like at the top of a staircase, and just looking at the room upside down, and thinking about walking on the ceiling, the lights coming out and fixtures, and interacting with doors that you've got to step over to get to another room. And his work is the closest I've seen to get to that for me, which is also invokes home and memories and being alone and sort of a feeling that defies words. And then Celeste's work, I think, is just so poetic. There's something to her pieces that remind me of words and of that ineffable structure and composition that, like the story of Abigail, it just is really, really specific and singular and powerful. But it may never be acknowledged, right? Like, if I hadn't heard that story and I didn't know that about that piece, it would still be this incredible painting to me. And so I think there's moments like this where we have the opportunity to talk about it, but often we don't. And I'm really curious about the relationship with patrons or collectors and the artists.
What about, the process always comes up in these kind of situations. You want to talk about your process? There's a little bit of mystery with Geoff and Ben, particularly with how they make their work, and we've had a lot of questions with Ben's technique and stuff, so if you can kind of talk about your own work.
They're paintings.
Yeah. And silkscreen on some of them. I know.
Yeah, no, they're all kind of different because they're from different times where I was trying to figure out how I was going to get that architectural drawing into the sandwich of layers. I think pretty much everything in the show has acrylic paint as well as oil paint. And that just became a technique that I took an abstract painting class, and it seems like that might be hard to teach, but I actually did learn some things about the depth that you can create without any imagery and overlapping of paint, and how active that can become and how that can express things that literal images can't. So having a splattery ground of acrylic paint to then, as you layer, you can then have something look like it's in front of or behind those kind of swirly natural forms. The drawing, I either, for something like that's that big, then I'm projecting it and using an acrylic paint pen. There's some pieces in the other room that the size of the panels was small enough that I used a silkscreen to put the drawing on. And it was kind of a way of keeping it from being precious, because if I had a silkscreen, then I could just run the image again if I lost it too much in the process. So, and also I have this thing about precision. And so a silkscreen was the most precise way to get the drawing onto the panel. But then I still am an oil painter. I like acrylics for what they can do, but oil paint is still how I think about color, and having different parts of my palette be translucent color, being able to glaze, and that's where like some restraint has to come in, so I don't totally cover up things that I've done, but I do like to work transparently and kind of sneak up on the spatial relationships or color and value and all those things. Did that answer any mysteries?
That's good, that's good.
And it's all from memory, and then the color choices are emotional. Sometimes pulled specifically from something in the memory, but also it's just like this feeling of being late for the ferry is purple, kind of thing. Obviously. Yeah, I didn't say the order of things. Thank you. Yes. For the panel gets a splatter of acrylic paint that those colors are from the memory and are, kind of a foundation of color relationships, and have a good amount of contrast in them already. And then the architectural drawing is over that. And then sometimes it'd be more acrylic because I'm still in acrylic. Once you start painting with oils on top of acrylic, you really shouldn't go backwards. So, and once the drawing is on there, then after that, it's usually just the oil paint on top.
Does the drawing get affected by, like, if you come up to a corner or something, you go,
Yeah.
oh, that swirl is pretty cool, I want to bring it forward or pull it back? Do you change things as you go?
Yes.
Yeah.
The drawing hopefully gets affected. Hopefully the drawing disappears enough in some places that it no longer looks like it.
Right.
Totally. But the other thing about having that splatter of acrylic is that then when I'm painting with oils later, I can, if I lose it too much, I can always find it. I can squint or even have a light at an angle so that I can see where it used to be, and then I can fake it again with oil paint on top.
That's neat.
So that's part of my push-pull process, is that I can always edit things forward. And if I push it so far that things are messed up, then that's just where it goes.
I think my collage work is in the pursuit of painting. When I paint, I feel pretty overwhelmed and vulnerable, and the gestures are something that I aspire to. So I feel like I'm in sort of an adolescent phase of my journey. This is something that I'll always do in some form, and I'd like to learn more about the technique of painting. In the meantime, I just feel so excited to make things and feel an urge to play and to experiment. So that's where the collage comes in. It's often based on certain colors, and I learn as I go. I learn a lot about composition, and I've been in a phase of making landscapes, and then I use a very particular matte adhesive in pretty big quantities to get everything to stick. Often it's found panels or foundations to build on with the paper. Sometimes in more recent work, I've done an underpainting loosely, sort of a sketch or drawing with paint that I then work from. But a lot of it's just stuff we did in elementary school, scissors and tearing stuff up and gluing it.
And the substrates are just found stuff? That
Mostly.
You're excited about, for one reason or another?
Yeah, so far.
And Celeste, you use collage a lot, but not in these pieces particularly.
Yeah, when I first started painting, I was using more collage. And here's, I guess, another memory moment or like a tactile memory experience where my mom sewed a lot when I grew up. She made a lot of my clothes. So I was always holding, and she was teaching me how to sew. I never got as good as she is, but I was always holding those thin pieces of pattern paper. And so when I started painting, it had a connection to me, and I think I was using it kind of like a map. I was using it like I was putting it down. It was becoming metaphorical what it meant. I was covering parts of it, showing other parts. So I used collage for a while. Sometimes I do, and sometimes you never see it because it's been painted over completely. I just know it's there. But with painting now, it depends. It depends each time. Like the diptych in the other room, I just set it up in my living room, kitchen area, and I just got a big old brush with a very liquidy, grayish blue color, and I just started to draw as if it was an enormous pencil, and I just looked to my space and I created this experience. And I didn't know where it was going to go. I didn't know there was going to be a person in it. It was just the beginning stage of kind of cutting it into the space. But I got really loose, and there's a voice that said, okay, there's something about this is really quite nice, so don't put much on it. So I let it be for quite a while, and then I realized with a little time that I was just going to be very minimal with color and let that energy just be what it was. And then sometimes I could just get really crammed with paint and color, and then it's just a matter of playing with light. And I love transparency. That's the one thing. I used watercolor as an illustrator, so I got really good at using watercolor. And watercolor is really tricky in terms of once it's there, you can kind of pick it up a little bit, but you lose that freshness. And when you mix certain colors together and they bleed together, and if you leave it, it's just really great. So I've been experimenting more and more with having really transparent oil and just letting the drips show, but then cutting in and using my drawing. And it changes a lot. I can change an oil painting. I don't know, the color palette changes. So and then I usually like to leave my pencil drawing sometimes and not try to cover everything up. I like to show maybe a little bit of the journey so people can notice that. I think that brings excitement and movement to the pieces.
Do we want to open it up? Do you want to talk first, sir?
Yeah, I can do that real quick. I think I like the history of the mark making, the history of the process and the work. Mine's not complicated at all, the process. I try to find a ground, like a specific color that I think is interesting, and generally I'll just cover the entire panel with an interesting color to just break up the surface. And then I thought a lot about watercolor as well, but in a different way because I hated watercolor so much, with an intense, fiery passion. And I was never any good at it, and I couldn't, but I loved oil painting so much, and I loved the idea of being able to take a really transparent, paint and layer it in a specific way, because the way I was taught from painting is, like a very sort of standard method. It's, glazing and scumbling, building up layers, and then changing, the tone or the color or adding a little warmth to it, adding a little cool to it by how you layer the paint on top of it. And I used to get so focused on these details and how to make a good oil painting that I would get lost, and I wanted to simplify things, so trying to put as little information down as I could with as much intensity as I could was sort of the way I was looking at it. Yeah, I think it'd be great if anybody has any questions from the audience. Or not, that's fine too.
Yeah, we're at 7 anyway, so any questions? One back there?
I'm always curious about what people's first contact was with their craft. So, is that when you were a reader, you first really contact with art? What was that?
Can you repeat the question?
She was asking if we could talk a little bit about our first contact with artwork, or even the process of making artwork. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just even art.
Even just art in general, yeah.
Your first,
Yeah.
like, maybe it's measuring, maybe it's laying, I don't know what it is, maybe it's expanding, your first contact, like, art.
I mean, there's probably a bunch that I have, but the one that's coming specifically to me is that my father took me to an art show in Portland. I'm from northwestern Maine, in a very small town, and art culture was not really a part of how I grew up. Outside of my grandmother's house, which she had paintings on the wall, which was really interesting, and big gold frames and things. But we went to a show at the Portland Museum of Art, and it was an N.C. Wyeth show. And then in the other part of the gallery was all these drawings by Alberto Giacometti. So like you couldn't be like further on the ends of the spectrum. But I was like running back and forth between the two buildings at like, I don't know, 8 or 9 or something like that. But the different approaches to like making something beautiful, I was just so fascinated by it. And I was, I had a sketchbook from the store or whatever, and I was like trying to draw these weird little Alberto Giacometti, skinny, weird, bony faces, and then going back into the Wyeth exhibition and trying to make a Wyeth painting with a pencil, which was ridiculous. But yeah, that one, that was probably my first like searing memory.
I don't know. I grew up in a family of artists. My grandfather, both my parents, I would say, are artists, woodworkers, that kind of, like just you make it yourself kind of feeling. We went to a lot of museums. They were educators. They took us to places that we were bored to be at, but it definitely got into our brains. But I would say that at some point, 8 or 9 years old, I was given 2 books, and one was M.C. Escher, and another one was something of Jackson Pollock kind of thing. And so it's funny because that's kind of where I've ended up. But I didn't like those books. I wasn't reading them a lot or anything. And there was also one that was like optical illusions and had an insert for doing like Moliere effect things. So I think I just kind of grew up in a state of being encouraged to draw and express ideas with images. Yeah.
I was a quiet little kid and I drew a lot. I found that I could draw. I just like to doodle, and I had 3 younger brothers. I'm the oldest. So it was like they're bothering me, or I need a break, and I would just start drawing. And so I just sort of learned that way, and then I started getting people saying, wow, I like this, and that encouraged me. And I think the first thing that popped into my head was like being a little kid, and our teacher were asking us to make little books. And so I was making these dictionaries, or these like little books, very well illustrated, or just very detail illustrated. And I just remember the teacher asking me if she could keep them. And I don't know. And then my parents, a lot of educators in my family, we didn't go off to galleries or museums or anything, but they kept on figuring out ways to have people teach me, like little lessons, little private lessons. I lived in a lake community in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, and so I would just have all these little private lessons. But my family, especially my mom's side, makers. My mom sewed. My grandfather was a carpenter. It's like they just really, really fine work, that a lot of accuracy, and I don't think I have that, but I was just encouraged, and I enjoyed it, so I just kept at it.
I grew up with a mother who quilted. She still quilts. My wife quilts. I think there's something about about fabric and patina and precision that I embrace and also kind of push against. But for me, there was a sort of a before and after moment that I'll never forget, where my mother took me to Museum of Fine Arts in Boston to a show called The Art of the Japanese Postcard. And at some point in the 90s, I think. And it was intense. It was a really intense experience because every single postcard on the wall worked. Something just worked, man. It was just powerful. And I think they were from the 20s and 30s, maybe 40s. I think there was a prolific time of travel, of interacting culturally with Japan, and these postcards came back to the States, and I forget whose collection it was, or whether it was a show of varying collectors' works, but the compositions and the colors and the angles, it was profound. And I can say confidently, I've never really looked at the world the same since. And it's an experience I share with my mom. I've got a book from that show. She knows what it meant to me, but again, it's hard to put words to, but it was a before and after experience, and I can say it changed the way I see everything, really. Yeah.
Is there anything we should cover that we didn't cover, or are we good? Do you want to talk about anything you feel like you want to say you didn't get addressed?
Really appreciate being in the show. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you.